So, Stephen, I will introduce you in Portuguese.
Thank
Is
you.
that okay for
Yes,
you?
of course,
Yes.
yes.
O Stephen é diretor para políticas e advocacy na IFLA, tem concentrado o seu trabalho num leque variado de questões como o desenvolvimento sustentável, governança da internet, direitos autorais, cultura, património e direitos humanos. Esta nossa sessão de hoje, este webinar que frisa, portanto, a questão da inclusão digital e as bibliotecas públicas contra as desigualdades no acesso à informação, pretende exatamente perceber como é que a internet e as tecnologias digitais podem ser tanto forças de divisão quanto forças de inclusão em toda a vida económica, social e cultural e cívica da nossa sociedade. As bibliotecas públicas podem ter e têm aqui uma influência fundamental para o bem, fornecendo uma abordagem multifacetada para a inclusão digital. E hoje vamos então explorar esta natureza desta contribuição diversificada das bibliotecas públicas e de que forma é que elas podem e devem estar no centro de estratégias para a inclusão digital. So, Stephen, you joined IFLA in 2016, is that okay?
That is correct.
Previously,
it feels like a long time ago.
Yes, a little bit. Previously, you were working at the UK Foreign Ministry for 7 years in Paris. And studied in Wales and the College of Europe in Warsaw. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Portanto, dizer-vos aqui que o IFLA tem, o Stephen tem uma experiência na IFLA desde 2016 portanto, aqui falar um bocadinho sobre a formação dele, que esteve na Universidade de Wales e também no Colégio da Europa na Varsóvia. Portanto, Portugal has a national network of public libraries. We have 243 municipalities with 413 public libraries at the moment, with computers to guarantee this public access to digital information. In this context, it's very important to understand if this is enough, if it covers the digital gap that exists in some parts of our country, and how libraries are doing their work to evaluate the impact of the access that is being provided to communities. That's our challenge here in the service we do with this national network of public libraries also. Portanto, eu estava a dizer aqui ao Stephen que, de facto, nós, na Direção-Geral do Livro, Arquivos e Bibliotecas, enquanto coordenadores da Rede Nacional de Bibliotecas Públicas, que acompanhamos 243 municípios, num total de 413 bibliotecas públicas neste momento, temos de facto esta obrigação também, todos juntos, de pensar se o serviço que as bibliotecas públicas disponibilizam neste momento de acesso à informação digital, se está a ser suficiente, de que forma é que ele cobre os vazios do acesso em determinadas zonas do nosso território, se ele é equitativo para todas as pessoas nas suas dificuldades de acesso, e se nós fazemos, enquanto profissionais da informação, a avaliação necessária destes serviços que disponibilizamos, da forma como estamos a disponibilizar. Dizer-vos que tive acesso, e vou partilhar convosco também nesta sessão, o link para o relatório da IFLA e da EIFL para o Dynamic Coalition on Public Access in Libraries, que nos fala precisamente sobre os impactos dos computadores e do acesso público através dos computadores e da internet para as bibliotecas. And this report, I was talking about the report. I'm going to read 2 paragraphs, if you don't mind, of this report. I think they are very clear on the message they bring to us, and makes us think exactly of the work we are doing, if we are doing the access to information, if it's the right path for all people with their different difficulties to access the information, the digital information. Portanto, este relatório, dizer-vos que coloca aqui assim algumas questões muito importantes. Portanto, quem são os utilizadores deste acesso através das bibliotecas, de que forma é que este acesso tem mudado ao longo dos anos, como é que é feito este acesso através dos utilizadores, quais são os resultados do acesso através das nossas bibliotecas, de que forma é que tem mudado, a propósito destas diferenças de acesso à informação digital, os próprios serviços das bibliotecas, e se é feita uma avaliação do valor económico que este acesso à informação simboliza ao ser realizado através das bibliotecas públicas. So I'm going to read these two paragraphs. Eu vou ler 2 parágrafos que eu achei extremamente importantes neste relatório e provavelmente depois também a conversa do Stephen seguirá também um pouco estas questões. So I'm going to read 2 paragraphs of this report. I'll do it first in English and then I'll translate it to Portuguese. Policy, library authorities and managers and many others who have invested in public access to computers and internet in libraries, public access, have a strong interest in understanding the usage of ICT in libraries and the impact of public access on digital inclusion. It may be particularly important for them to know, for example, the extent of computer and internet use by groups that are more likely to be underserved or digitally excluded, such as senior citizens, rural communities, those with lower income and others. They may also want to better understand what social and economic benefits public access generates for users and society at large. So I'm going to translate. Os decisores políticos, bibliotecários e gestores de bibliotecas e muitos outros que investiram no acesso público a computadores e internet em bibliotecas terão um grande interesse em entender o uso das TIC em bibliotecas e o impacto deste acesso público na inclusão digital. Pode ser particularmente importante saber, por exemplo, a extensão do uso de computadores e internet por grupos com maior probabilidade de serem excluídos digitalmente, como idosos, comunidades rurais, população de baixos rendimentos e outros. Poderão também querer entender melhor quais os benefícios sociais e económicos deste acesso digital, que este acesso digital gera para os utilizadores e para a sociedade geral. Aqui a questão dos impactos. At the same time, public access providers, such as library managers, may need more data on how well the library's public access infrastructure is working and about how it is being used on staff competencies and ICT training abilities, on digital skills of the local community, and about libraries' users' needs and expectations in regard to digital content and services. To encourage future investment, they will need solid evidence about the demand for and value of library digital infrastructure and services to their communities. Throughout assessment of the impacts and value of public access computers and internet in libraries is therefore a key task. Ao mesmo tempo, portanto, traduzindo este parágrafo, os facilitadores deste acesso digital, os gestores de bibliotecas, poderão necessitar de mais dados, de saber como a infraestrutura deste acesso está a funcionar, como está a ser utilizada, aferir sobre as competências TIC dos recursos humanos que facilitam este acesso nas bibliotecas, portanto, ao público, aferir as competências digitais da própria comunidade, mas muito importante também aferir as necessidades e as expectativas dos utilizadores da biblioteca relativamente a estes conteúdos e serviços digitais que poderiam eventualmente ser disponibilizados. Para conseguir incentivar o investimento, precisamos, os profissionais de informação, de evidências sólidas sobre a demanda e o valor destas infraestruturas que são disponibilizadas, dos serviços digitais da biblioteca para as suas comunidades. A avaliação dos impactos deste acesso público às TIC nas bibliotecas é, assim, a chave essencial. So, Stephen, I'm going to leave you with this, with the floor, as we say in English. Is that correct for your presentation?
That's correct.
I'm going to be here, but I'm going to shut down my camera. So it's all about you and this opportunity to learn about what we are going to share with us today. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Sandra, and thank you very much everyone who is here today to join this webinar. It's obviously really good to be here. I'm calling you right now from Thailand, so I'm really hoping that the Wi-Fi holds out and also my brain holds out. So we've been having a week of workshops and definitely my brain is feeling it right now. So I'm going to share the slide. Let me say right now, I'm also going to be using a little bit of Mentimeter. We've been using a lot of Mentimeter recently, but I think it's always interesting in these sessions, especially when especially for the longer sessions, to make sure that we actually interact a little bit, even ahead of the questions and answer sessions. I'm obviously going to try and not talk for too long, because I think it is most interesting to hear the questions you're asking, to get a sense of where your priorities are. It's certainly the case that while IFLA looks, and while we look as much as we can to produce work that will answer the questions you're asking, and particularly in my case, answer the advocacy questions that you're asking, we don't know everything. And so we really do rely on you to highlight what it is that would help. So as introduced by Sandra, we're going to be talking a little bit today about digital inclusion and public libraries against inequalities in access to information. As said, I'm Stephen Wyber, I'm Director of Policy and Advocacy at IFLA. This means that I'm responsible for our work, both to overseeing our engagement with international organizations and being a voice, suddenly trying to bring together the concerns, raise awareness of the concerns, but also the potential of libraries when we're talking to international organizations like UNESCO, like the Internet Governance Forum. I'll say a little bit about these later on. But I think more importantly, that we're doing our best to actually support you in your advocacy, that we're acting as a clearinghouse, you'd say in English, a space where really great stories, really great evidence can be brought together, can be shared in a way that you can then apply in terms of making the case, as well as sharing ideas, sharing tendencies and trends that could be really interesting for you in your work. So I'm sure you know a little bit about IFLA already, but just to introduce quickly the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. We are the leading international body representing the interests of library and information services and their users. This, of course, covers libraries of all different types, so public libraries, community, school, national, academic, special, and beyond. We sell ourselves as being the global voice of the library and information profession, and we have just over 1,400 members in about 135 countries. To be honest, okay, those are the big words, those are the grand ways of talking about what IFLA is. I admit I prefer to think about it in terms of, crucially, we're about inspiring, enabling, engaging and connecting the field, ensuring that everyone can benefit from excellent library services. And I think importantly, ensuring that libraries have the resources and support to provide these. And we do this by providing a space. We are there to realize the potential, to catalyze the potential of our volunteers, of our members, by providing a space to talk, to come up with standards, to come up with ideas, and sometimes even just to build up energy in order to go out there and really help the communities that we are here to serve. So we're going to go to a first Mentimeter question. As I said, there's quite a few of these. So I imagine that having been through the pandemic, you are probably familiar with Menti. It's like Slido otherwise. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to see if I can go straight over to Menti, which I definitely had up on. Okay, I'm just going to give me a second. I'm going to go over to Menti. You should already be able to access this. And I will then, there we go, share the screen. So there we go.
So
this should be
you want us to enter this the Menti
so
and answer the question, is that?
Exactly, yep. And it will ask you that
vamos entrar no site do Menti que o Stefan está a sugerir para respondermos. Colocamos o código que conseguem ver no visor. With that code, is that correct, Stefan?
Yes, with that code.
785-378-56.
Yep, 7853.
We are going to answer this question.
Yep, the first question you have up here. Very good. Okay, someone's got it. Is my voice clear for other people as I'm doing this with a headset? So normally it's okay, but I can see one of the questions
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, good. So it's,
You can access the Q&A, the questions.
I can.
Okay, thanks.
Someone's wishing me good evening, and another one has said they're having a
Yes,
hard
yes,
time
yes,
with the
yes.
sound. So
Dizer-vos que aqui o nosso chat parece que está novamente aqui com uma questão. Isto deve ser da predefinição do Zoom, que já no webinar anterior também tinha acontecido aqui assim este problema, mas de qualquer das maneiras, através do balão das perguntas e respostas, vocês conseguem colocar as vossas questões para que o Stefan depois possa também responder.
okay, that's good. I suppose it's probably normal. It's a webinar with 20. A webinar that talks about internet in the title is probably going to encourage people who are interested in the internet and interested in the digital world. Let's give an answer for a couple more. Okay, 10 more seconds. We've got 11 respondents so far. I'll be using a little bit of Mentimeter because, as I said, I'm keen to hear your views, your perceptions of where things stand at the moment.
We have at the moment 28 participants online. Maybe they are with some difficulty to.
There's no such thing as a webinar or an event about the internet without internet problems.
Yes.
Every time I have been to an internet governance event, the Wi-Fi always fails.
Always fails.
And I suspect it's because everyone comes along
so
with
you
at least
are
3 or 4 devices.
So how are you with this question? You are cautiously positive, or
I think there's people are overwhelmingly cautiously positive.
Okay.
But I think no. I think this is okay. We've got 15 people so far, so I think this is good. This is encouraging, and I think this is probably the correct attitude to have about the internet. One person is worried, which I think is an interesting one. Now, this is firstly a very general question. The digital world is clearly a massive thing. You can't just sum it up so easily like that, but I think it's already an encouraging thing, a positive thing that people feel broadly positive, because I know that there can be a tendency to wish that it would go away, to look at it as being a negative, something that has disrupted, something that's caused a lot of difficulty. I know that as something that's caused a lot of difficulty. I know I certainly hear this sometimes when we talk to publishers as well, that they just wish that ebooks would go away. I think being positive is also important because librarians do have this incredibly important role towards the public, and in particular quite more vulnerable members of the public, not to scare them, but to inspire them with confidence and skills in order to be safe and effective internet users. So I'm going to shift back to the next slide, because I think just following up from what we see there, what we said there, the way that certainly IFLA and that we tend to look at this question of public access to the internet and libraries is that we need to help everyone get the best out of the internet. It is, after all, an information resource. And so just as throughout history, we have worked to help people get the best out of information, how to move from simply having information to learning to apply it, to understand it, to make sure that information can be a force for good. This logic, this responsibility also applies in the digital world. So how can we help people?
Sorry, Stephen, but I have to interrupt you. This, what you said now about how historically our libraries do their work to guarantee the access to information. We have done it in different supports, books. Now we have internet, we had CDs. I mean, a while ago, CDs went away, and now we have clouds, we have all different access to information to the digital world. E-government also. It's very important to understand these shifts in our own history of our equipments and our services, to accept them as change, to adapt and to devolve to our communities the best answer that we can. Is that the idea?
That is the idea, and I think the important thing is that, well, the technologies and the supports change, and it might have been easy previously to believe that supports wouldn't change, but the values and this overall goal remains the same.
Okay.
And so even if we're in a digital environment, these values, and I think we would argue that these values are just as relevant as ever, that the importance of universal meaningful access to information is as relevant as ever. And clearly one thing is that when we talk about meaningful access to information, it's not just a question of quantity. It's true that we've moved from an environment of information scarcity. Well, but no, I have to be careful about that. If you speak English, you've moved from an environment of information scarcity to information abundance. It is not always the case for other languages that you have moved from information scarcity to information abundance. But as said, quantity alone is not a guarantee that information shared is necessarily helpful. It certainly requires new and different skills in order to be able to navigate this. Clearly, Portuguese is not a small world language. There are many. I'm at a workshop at the moment with colleagues who have come in from across Asia and the Pacific, and you have people who speak some really sort of rare languages, small languages. The internet in Italke, one of the languages in Fiji, it's a very small internet. And so the role of libraries there is different. Nonetheless, we shouldn't get quantity confused with quality. Not to say, of course, simply it is not a bad thing that we've moved away from a world where information full stop is scarce. It still requires this effort. And so I think that's why in this challenge set out here, that it's so important to talk about getting the best out of the internet, just as we tried to help people get the best out of the information world, out of the body of information available to humanity, and therefore also to benefit from the knowledge and skills necessary to be safe and confident users, and to turn information, to turn knowledge, to turn access to this into real development outcomes. So better lives, greater freedoms, the realization of human rights. That makes sense?
Yes, citizenship. How do we use our rights to make our voices heard? Sometimes we have to sometimes, not always, we have to know how to use the information and make that filter. We were talking about what's good and what's bad, so I can improve my life, my knowledge, be a better person, a better student, a better professional, and in global, the whole society benefits about this access of information. Só abrir aqui parênteses para quem nos está a ouvir. Portanto, o Stephen falava desta questão das mudanças na história das bibliotecas que facilitam o acesso à informação. Nós falamos muitas vezes de livros, aqui a questão do livro impresso, e de facto, e também batalhamos muito a questão do acesso à informação como uma garantia para a cidadania, que de facto é isso. Ao longo da história das bibliotecas, muitas foram as mudanças deste acesso à informação, e muitas mudanças também passaram as bibliotecas, e aquilo que nós nos debatemos hoje em dia é garantir que as pessoas, o nosso público, consegue ter este acesso facilitado, para que a própria vida da pessoa tenha de facto aqui um impacto de melhoria, que terá certamente contributos para toda a sociedade. So Stephen, please.
Thank you. So another Mentimeter slide. I'm sorry, I said I've used a lot of Mentimeter, and so I've been enjoying it probably far too much. So I'm going to switch over to the other slide, because the next question is, why does connectivity matter? Why should we care about ensuring there is public access to the internet, that people have access to the internet? And this one asks you to put in words or sentences.
Vamos responder a mais uma questão. Por que é importante a conectividade?
Obviously partly to join this webinar, but
Estão a conseguir aceder
There's also Mentimeter works pretty well on phones, so you can also do it on your phone as well as on your computer. It's already a good first answer that it's where the world is. If you want access to the world, you need access to the internet. That's a really good one. Approach to the world again. I think there's absolutely. Oh, great! These are coming in.
Okay.
Like evolution, knowledge, and sharing experience. I like that. There's that sense of really participating in actually being part of the change that's happening. Being on top of information. I think that's a really interesting point. It's a piece of research I would love to do, but we can't. I come from the UK, and I know there are a number of newspapers that used to be available physically, and now they're only available online, certainly with academic journals.
Yes.
Things that used to be printed are now only available online. So actually, it's not as if by remaining unconnected, you are in a steady state that you continue to have access to the same information. In fact, you have access to less if you're not connected. Knowledge, exactly, learning.
But don't you think this question about being on the top of all information that is available, it's something impossible today?
Well, I think, I suppose, and this is getting into personal views now. I swear, no, I'm sure anyone who's involved in sort of education in any way, or anyone who's got children, will have sort of seen that there is increasingly, I think, a tendency to move away from the idea of holding the knowledge yourself and move towards a logic of knowing where to find the information.
The right
Because
information.
yes, so
The information I need, yes.
exactly. So we're focused less on memorizing things and more on knowing where to find that information that we might need. So memorizing dates and memorizing formulas and things like this, and a lot of it's moved on in the same way that a lot of things that used to be done by a reference desk are now done by Wikipedia. But I've got a slide touching on this later. It's obviously quite a broad question. Thank you so much. I'm really enjoying these.
Yes, we have an answer in Portuguese. I'm trying to translate.
I can speak Spanish, so.
Oh, okay.
But because the world is working in patamares, I don't know.
Two different stages, the physical
stages,
and the one which is next to us.
The proximate,
yes. Yes.
What's near to us. And the digital one, which brings us close to what's far away and that we don't know.
And the knowledge we can obtain at any moment. Yes.
Exactly. I think that's what I was saying there. I'm glad I learned some Spanish. This is helping me here.
But Portuguese isn't Spanish, okay?
It's not the same. No.
It's a little bit different.
A little bit different. There's enough similarity to help me. Don't expect me to understand when it's spoken, I fear. Communication is a really important one. Exactly.
Yes,
I like that point there about that also, connectivity is inclusion right now. You really almost talking about equal connectivity and equal access to the internet is the same thing about talking about equality itself. I like the social point about without connectivity, we tend to be alone and isolated.
yes.
That's an interesting point because so often there's the accusation that actually social media and other things tend to put people into bubbles and make them less communicative with others, but I think it works in both directions. Democratization, I think that's a really important one. It's certainly one of the original goals, the ideals of the internet, was the idea that it was the space where if you wanted to share what you had to say, you didn't need to own a newspaper or a printing press or something like that. Obviously, I think correctly, we are cautiously positive about the internet, and we know that some of those original values, they're still there, but we have to be a little bit realistic. Again, the point about proximity, about closeness. I like the point, certainly having knowledge of changes that apply to libraries, exactly. It certainly made the work of IFLA as an organization, it's completely transformed what we can do. Proximity, there's a lot of points here about proximity, which I think is valuable, important. So I'm going to go back to my other slide. So I suppose this is quite a sort of there's a sort of summary of themes under which we include. We can talk about the importance of connectivity, and certainly it's some of the ways that we talk about it in our advocacy work. That firstly, it's economically necessary. Certainly for those of us, I know certainly I've been one of the lucky ones who was able to continue working during the pandemic. I know in the library field, we had a big shift online. It's crazy to think that even sort of, I don't know, for 20 years ago, that probably wouldn't have been possible. There wasn't sufficiently high quality connectivity, and that actually the obligation to close the library doors would have actually meant we have to close the library. And instead, we've actually been able to keep libraries open, even if we can't actually physically go through the door. And the same applies for so many other roles that have made it possible. I think certainly also it's been amazing for small businesses, because businesses that previously wouldn't have had the possibility to sell to people in other markets, to make contributions, they now are. Certainly over the last few days, I've heard so many examples of programs which have allowed small craft people, really small companies, often with the support of libraries, to start selling elsewhere, to build up connections, to benefit from their specialist knowledge, their specialist abilities, their unique characteristics. That's been really strong. Socially necessary, I don't know, a lot of people talked about proximity, about how to fight loneliness. And I think that's absolutely right. I think we've certainly seen with the internet, it's also allowed people with similar interests who would otherwise have found it really difficult to be together, to spend time together, to actually find each other. Certainly for some minority groups who would otherwise be at risk of discrimination, at risk of being the only person in their community, it's provided opportunities to feel much more like they're part of a community, which is definitely a positive. Culturally necessary is an interesting one. I think certainly it's changed the way we experience culture. There's some fascinating, it's had a fascinating impact on the music industry, obviously in some ways, because it's meant that actually now all music is in competition with each other. But I think also it has allowed new voices to come through, again, in line with those original dreams of the internet. It's meant that you don't need to have a big record company behind you in order to be discovered. It's allowed many cultures to actually share things, to share experiences, to share expression that otherwise would not have been the case. Clearly, of course, we need to be aware that the model of the internet does tend to favor having bigger networks, and there's always the risk that some cultures will tend to make more noise than others. But I think arguably, if we're talking about cultural rights and the importance of being able to access your own culture, be it from contemporary performances to digitized heritage, the internet has made that easier. And so if you don't have connectivity, you can't do this. Sandra, you talked about the importance of civic engagement. I could have said civically and democratically necessary. Certainly on the civic side, so many governments are moving towards, they've moved from physical and digital together to digital first to digital only. So there are many functions which simply you can't do physically anymore. So you have to have connectivity, or you need to have some way of getting online. So connectivity is crucial to being a citizen. If you want to be a citizen fully, you almost have to actually be able to get online to do that. And so that's why we're seeing more and more. We've seen resolutions at the UN General Assembly underlining that connectivity should be seen as a human right, that it's something that should be seen as just as essential, as a key part of the rights of access to information, the rights of access to education, to culture, to science. We can't do these things, we can't consider that if we don't have connectivity.
Because I'm sorry to interrupt, because
Please,
it's a duty also, so we can express, so we can do our so we can be a better citizen. We have to integrate this access as a human right. Is that what you are saying?
It's what the UN has said. I don't know. It's that there are UN resolutions that are underlining that connectivity, access to the internet should be seen as a human rights issue, because I think, as said earlier, it's not as if not being connected provides the same amount of information as it did 20 years ago. There are so many things that you simply can no longer do offline. There's so many news sources that you can no longer read or access offline. There's so many educational possibilities and other things that you can no longer access if you are offline. And so if people are kicked off the internet, or if they don't have access to the internet, they have a narrower range of possibilities to fulfill their other rights.
Yes.
This is one of the reasons why there's an argument that we should treat the internet in the same way as we treat electricity or water or other sort of public utilities, as something where it shouldn't be the case that anyone is cut off. Everyone should have access, and it needs to be regulated in a way that companies can't just they can't just decide that they're only going to sell to the richest customers, that they actually have an obligation to make sure that everyone is connected. That make sense?
Yes, at the same level for everybody.
Exactly, that this is not something that, and of course we all benefit by more of us being online. And there was a really welcome comment I saw from Armando in the questions, that we do better and we think better if we think together.
If we think together, yes.
And so we think best if we all think together.
And we have Rosa Domingues. Rosa is our I'm missing the word. Our technique here in DGLab, who has connected to you at the first place for this, who invited you for this webinar, and she is saying access to information should be the fourth pillar of democracy. She's giving us this topic also. No,
exactly, because the whole idea of democracy is that people are you're allowing people to take decisions, but how can you take a decision if you don't have information? Otherwise it's a guess, which isn't ideal. So moving on to the next slide. As I'm just effectively at this point, I'm just running through some of the key arguments and some of the key reflections. So once again, I think I've only got 5 of these, so there's not too many Mentimeter slides. But just to go back to Mentimeter, I'm going to go and just move us forward a slide. And so what options are there to get connected? This is it's a relatively simple question, but it's always actually interesting to get the answers and then think what this means. Please, of course, someone say library.
Vamos responder a mais uma questão. When you say what options you are,
what options? So in what ways? You can almost think about, where do you go online? What are the places? What are the tools you can use to get online? Obvious answers are fine.
So when I go to search for information, how do I do it?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
it's a government site. It's a Google.
But it's even things like it's home computer, it's phone.
Okay, more devices.
Phone through the internet. Yes, so devices or places.
Devices or places. Okay. Portanto, quando acessamos à internet, que sites é que recorremos ou em que circunstâncias é que precisamos de fazer, e que aparelhos, por norma, é que utilizamos quando o fazemos. Portanto, através do telemóvel, através do computador. Se quiserem escrever em português também, o Stefan já partilhou essa habilidade. I'm saying to the
Oh,
participants,
please,
if
no,
they
no,
want to
I'm
talk
getting,
in Portuguese, you
oh,
can.
that's fine, of course, yeah. Exactly. I know the first point's a really good one. I think this is definitely going in the direction of certainly where I'm going. So the public Wi-Fi, and I think the implication there that yes, sometimes computer or smartphone, but that's not always the case. Computer, phone, office computer as well. Absolutely. Wi-Fi, definitely. You're seeing more and more in outdoor spaces. Exactly. Okay. So yeah, I think we've got what that one. That's most of quite a lot of the key points there. But I suppose, I don't know, what I wanted to get at between that is what makes libraries unique in the internet access infrastructure. And I know I quite like talking about this idea of infrastructures. Traditionally, obviously, when you think about infrastructure, you think about things like roads and bridges and tunnels and so on. That's obviously your road infrastructure, your transport infrastructure. But actually, it's a concept that's helpful. It describes all of the things, all of the institutions, all of the elements that allow you to do things. And so I know we talk quite a lot about, for example, libraries being part of the cultural infrastructure, the educational infrastructure, the democratic infrastructure. In this case, clearly as part of the internet access infrastructure. So I guess I don't know, the things are sort of important. We tend to describe them in a set of three. And I suppose a little bit feels like the David Lancu's line about bad libraries build collections, good libraries build services, great libraries build communities. But clearly, I don't know, the collections are an important thing, because even if, I don't know, clearly libraries do have physical collections, but so much of the time libraries are subscribing to content, and content that may not be available to people elsewhere. Certainly that's the case for academic libraries, but often public libraries will also do so, and that's something that makes libraries different to other suppliers. And crucially, there's an element of curating content, of providing things in a way that's particularly helpful, that's particularly tailored to the needs of users. And so I think the importance of libraries as content holders, or at least gateways, providers, is a really important one. This content can include skills platforms, it can include training possibilities, all things that simply may not be available through an individual's home computer or home internet connection. Spaces remain really important. I think one of the sets of trends that we came up with in our 2021 trend report, responding to ideas that were shared by young leaders around the world, was that I think we would see, even as the world becomes more digital, there was a bit of a backlash that people actually realize that they value the physical, or even that actually the best is a mixture of the virtual, the digital, and the physical. Because for many people, it's more comfortable to go online around other people. The library, of course, provides a one-stop shop, you'd say in English, so you can go online, but you can also do so many other things. Obviously, in a lot of countries, libraries co-locate services. So in addition to going to the internet, going to the library to go on the internet and fill in your tax form or apply for something, you're also doing other activities. And I think that it's something that clearly isn't going away. This value of having a civic space, a space where people can be together, remains important, including in a digital world, libraries bring both of those factors together. And clearly, vitally, it's staff. It's the fact that the internet users and libraries they know that there is someone to talk to ask questions about. I read plenty of things saying that actually a huge share of the time that staff spend on the front desk in libraries is answering questions about the internet and answering questions about digital devices. These are clearly questions people don't know the answers. If they weren't in the library and didn't have access to this, they'd be lost. They wouldn't be doing things. So, and of course, clearly, as I said, libraries understand needs, and so have that potential really to turn simple access to information via the internet into something meaningful, into something that actually changes lives for the better. I think there's an interesting angle here, and I think this is a kind of an important advocacy point. especially for us in Europe, where in general there's a relatively high level of income, there's a relatively high level of internet connectivity. We talk about public access, public connectivity. I'm saying private connectivity. I guess what I mean there is when people have home access, when people have access over their smartphones, and so aren't relying on that public connection. Clearly, there are still people for whom the internet represents the library will represent their first taste of internet access. I know some of these statistics are old, but there was certainly the idea that, I don't know, it was back in the early 2010s, there were about 1 million Europeans a year who went on the internet for the first time, and they did that at a library. And so libraries were helpful because for people who maybe didn't understand the potential of the internet, or weren't sure about it, or certainly didn't feel like they were ready to commit to paying a certain amount of money every month to get online, libraries provided that stepping stone, that route into the internet, and arguably will still provide a route into particular applications of the internet or particular technologies they don't have at home. They're not going to buy it straight away, a bit like with many books. They're not going to buy them straight away. They can test them out, try them out for the first time. And this, of course, is actually quite a good economic argument, because in the end, libraries are filling a gap. They're filling something that would be a market failure otherwise, and in due course, they're driving subscriptions to the internet, private subscriptions. However, what about when everyone does have a smartphone? So I think this is almost the last Mentimeter slide. I tried not to get too crazy about this. And this is a simpler one, fortunately. Oh, fantastic, some extra answers there. I can share these answers with you afterwards as well. I can download them. So if everyone has a smartphone, do we still need access possibilities in libraries? This is fortunately just a clicking a box thing. There we go. We're all convinced this is good.
I think the yes is going to come up.
I think people prefer yes, no questions as well. It makes life easier.
We
And
all
of course, yes.
feel the same about libraries today.
Exactly.
in our webinar.
Exactly. Well, you joined this session. I may come back to this later and see if anyone answered maybe no or not sure. But again, I think turning up to this webinar is it's a proof of your commitment to these things. So,
Yeah.
hang on, that's it. I apologize, just going back to that one. I went to the wrong slide there. So I'm going to go back to this one. So I think this is actually probably one of the really big questions for us when we're talking about public access in libraries, especially on the advocacy side right now, because there are a lot of people, and I think particularly amongst politicians, who will be tempted to say, well, why are we spending money on public access in libraries? Everyone has a smartphone. And so it's really useful to be able to just make those arguments, explain why it is that the public access matters. And there are many ways. So a lot of these are things that you mentioned about how we get online. But it's important to underline that often the data, the statistics that get published, which ask how many people are connected, we shouldn't take them entirely at face value. The international standard for levels of connectivity at the moment, I think it's about, you have a connection speed of 2 megabytes per second download, 1 megabyte per second upload. That's quite slow internet. That is not fast enough to do a huge number of the things that we do online. And of course, it says absolutely nothing about the type of device that people have. It says nothing about whether you have the sort of device that lets you fill in a form, that lets you write a CV to apply for a job. It doesn't say any of these, it doesn't say anything about these. So it's really important to underline that, well, the sort of connectivity that everyone expects, it requires devices, and not everyone has devices. And so actually public connectivity, it provides an opportunity more economically to give access to that wider range of devices. Oh, sorry, there's a couple of copying in here. I think something went wrong in the formatting. There's an issue with private connectivity. Oh, no, this does make sense. So I apologize. One of the issues with private connectivity, often there's a single home computer, then there's a need to share. this can be an issue. Obviously, as we know, the internet does like to follow us around and does like to look at what we're looking at on the internet, and then it follows it up with adverts. And so potentially if someone in a single household wants to look up information that may be a little bit more sensitive, that's very personal, they have concerns, and then the next family member comes on, looks at the computer and starts seeing adverts for the thing that that the first family member was looking for, that's hardly ideal. Whereas if you have library computers or other public access computers which scrub, which delete the memory after each use, then that provides opportunities.
Yes,
Clearly,
with the pandemic, we suffered that problem. Children had to access to school online, and parents had to do their job online also. Families with 3-4 members, only one computer, and the other families who didn't had any computer at all.
Yeah.
Libraries are essential for guarantee this access to the devices, not only the information, but also the device itself.
Yeah, and to do things exactly you say, don't know, it's difficult to do your homework. I don't know, would anyone want to write a 1,000-word essay on a mobile, on a phone? It's not possible. You can't write a CV on a phone. There's the importance of, there's a lack of support in private connectivity. There's no one there to give you advice necessarily. A lack of content. You're forced, you can only read what you subscribe to if you have money, or you're simply locked out on so many other things. A lot of people still have data caps. There's a limit on how much data, how much they can download or upload, which
Yes.
can also mean that they can't access everything that they would otherwise. And also actually, and this is something we're sadly likely to see more and more, natural disasters, one of the things that they do is cut off the internet. They burn through cables, they burn through other things. And so there's also a value in having community connectivity centers like libraries, which can provide a secondary connectivity. So there's a range of arguments, but it's something that we do need to do, is underline, is explain to people why it is that public connectivity really still matters, even as we move to full home connectivity. I think this is the last Mentimeter slide, but I'd be interested just to get your ideas on this. What is it that we need as a sector to realize this potential, to be the sector that that provides people with the access, that provides the support, and I think in particular that allows people to make that transition, to make that jump. I was saying, okay, there's one person. Okay, clearly, so the words I was saying, they're actually convinced one person that we don't need libraries anymore. Okay, perfect. So people are starting to answer. So yes, absolutely. Financial, and clearly, obviously, this is a difficult thing to say, but actually I will come back to later the idea that investing in public access, it is a profitable investment for any government. So yes, quality, impact, internet, good computers. I think, yes, that's I love that. They need to be ready to provide the right answers. That is a really key thing. I don't know, one of the risks I'm sure you're aware of, and not only when it comes to internet connectivity, is that libraries tend to be seen as sort of the institution that could do everything. And I know that we can often in the sector have a temptation to feel like we should be doing everything and we should be taking on all the responsibilities. And firstly, I know that's a recipe for burnout. That's not a
Yes.
great way forward.
Yes, we often take that responsibility to our actions every day. Yes, to do all the best we can to help.
Exactly. And the problem is too often other stakeholders simply don't think of libraries as a partner. But no, it's an argument that, again, this is something that we make outside of the connectivity space, but far more generally, that actually there's a very wide range of government ministries and government agencies that benefit from the work of libraries in helping people access health information, in helping people access employment information, in helping people access government services. They don't pay for libraries. There's normally only one or two agencies or ministries that pay for libraries, and there's always a risk that people take libraries for granted. Perfect. Okay, yes, so investment in technology, hardware. Hardware is an important one. I will come back to that. And so, yes, human resources, the fact that, yes, libraries shouldn't be forced to take on these responsibilities without support, without funding, without help. Libraries need to update themselves. I think that's also why I asked that question at the beginning, and I'm really glad that people were cautiously positive. As I said, in the publishing sector, I always feel that there are many people who simply want to close their eyes and hope that the internet goes away. I'm sure there are people in our sector as well who want that, and we simply can't do that. It's not going away.
Unfortunately, sometimes there are some still think that way, yes.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's normal when you're faced with disruption and change. Excellent. So I don't know, I think there's some really good sort of consistent points here about connectivity. Okay, so I'm just going to switch back to the other slide, and then I think that's the last of the Mentimeter slides, so you're good. So a lot of these I'm actually going to cover through, but I know this looks like it's the bibliography page. It probably could be the bibliography page, but I wanted in the rest of the time that I have, oh wow, I've talked for a long time, I'm sorry about this. I'm going to run through some of the most recent resources that we've put out. Now, these are all projects that we have carried out with the Dynamic Coalition on Public Access in Libraries. With this, we work together with IFOL, Electronic Information for Libraries, which does a lot of good work.
Yes, you have already there the report I was talking
exactly
in the
that's
beginning. I'm going to put it on our chat also.
Perfect, yes.
The link for our site, okay, for everyone to see also.
So I'm going to run through them. These are all reports where really what we've tried to do is look across the existing evidence, because actually a lot of work has been done in these areas, or there are a lot of reference to libraries and different strategies. What's important is to bring them together, and the reason for that being, as I said at the beginning, to help you in your advocacy, because a key function of IFLA is to make it easier for you to advocate by taking those really great examples from other parts of the world and allowing you to show them, to use the data, but I think crucially also to show that it is normal to see libraries as essential parts of their internet infrastructure, that it's normal to see libraries as key players, that it's normal to see libraries as being active in combating digital exclusion, promoting digital inclusion. So the first report I was going to talk about, and this came out a couple of years ago now, but what we did was actually look through the different digital and broadband strategies that governments produced, and actually look to see to what extent they reference libraries, that they actually talked about libraries as being part of that internet infrastructure. The reason for that being that we can then actually, it's possible then for you to go to your government and say, well, all of these countries are doing it. Why not you? Why not us? So this report focused strongly on, firstly, on the different understanding that we can see, the different roles of libraries according to different governments around the world. And so clearly there was a focus on public access, that these were governments that had set targets of 90% of the population, 95% of the population having access to the internet. And so libraries were seen as a way of providing that. There is a lot of recognition, I'll talk a bit more about this later, of the importance of libraries as providers of digital literacy and ICT skills. I think what's interesting in that is that there's a combination of support they provide within schools, for example, and I'm not sure about Portugal, you'll be able to tell me. Certainly in a country like France, teacher librarians, and in the US, teacher librarians can have quite an important role in promoting digital literacy, promoting information literacy online. And so that role is actually recognized, that potential application of the skills, of the powers of libraries is noted. Supporting education in general through distance learning as portals to distance learning, making it possible, for example, for people in rural areas to actually get better educated, access qualifications. And I think there's also, interestingly, quite a strong focus on the role of libraries first in giving access to heritage. So carrying out digitization projects. I apologize, there's a typo on that slide. Heritage digitization projects, especially local heritage, and promoting local content creation. I think that's also obviously been a really interesting evolution in the role of libraries that has been recognized, that we understand that we have this huge potential, not just to be a place where people consume libraries, consume information, because that's never just what was happening, that we are a place where people create, where people apply, where people do things. And so the internet's made that far more explicit. We have libraries encouraging children to do book reviews and share them online. We have libraries helping people set up email, set up their other accounts, and so on. So all of these things are actually recognized in national policies, which is powerful. It means that we can go, as you said, to our governments and say, well, this isn't a freak. This isn't just libraries talking. This is other governments talking. We also looked a little bit at the different types of intervention that are used. So some focus on simply getting libraries connected and providing for their technology needs. There were some welcome efforts that were focused on providing ongoing support and updates to technology. That's a really helpful thing. There's always a risk that it's easier for government to pay to make a one-year payment than make a multi-year payment. And so they will buy some new computers and then ignore the library for 10 years, which is not great, because after a few years, things stop working. Similarly with connectivity, it's far better to have ongoing connectivity, not just it's paid for a year and then the library has to absorb it. Different types of initiatives focus on different types of libraries, some on public libraries, some on community libraries, and so on. Policy design types of intervention were interesting. Some are more about building partnerships, some are about using universal service funds. These are usually made up, they're funded by taking a share of the profits of telecoms companies, of internet service providers, and then the types of policy units, the types of funding. I guess I can see that a hand has been raised. I might just sort of whip through these and then get to some sort of broader questions at the end. Or
Yes,
yeah,
we can make, I'll tell the participants in Portuguese so that they can make their questions at the balloon of questions and answers. Por favor, as perguntas que tenham podem colocar por escrito, que depois o Stefan também tem acesso, portanto, aos balões das questões e das respostas, e ele consegue ver, portanto, e depois no final podemos também responder às vossas questões. Vão tomando nota e coloquem depois, por favor, por escrito, está bem?
Great. Okay, so as I'm conscious I'm already over the hour, and I was worried I wouldn't have enough content, so this is good. Secondly, we produced a report where we looked at digital skills strategies that have been shared. And I think once again, just highlighting that point, libraries do get mentioned quite a lot. It is absolutely normal that libraries are seen as part of the digital skills infrastructure, and in particular digital skills infrastructure for people who might not otherwise benefit. I think, again, it's a point that links back to what I mentioned earlier about the role of libraries in schools, but also crucially the role of libraries in helping people who have left school. I know that I always get a little bit annoyed when we say that education is the same thing as formal schooling. It isn't. I think the entire adult learning and education sector gets very annoyed when people say that. They should, because in reality, once people have left school, what is the go-to? Where is the go-to place in order to access learning? Libraries have to be one of them, at least. So in terms of looking through other things, there's some very interesting references to how different types of libraries can support skills development. Certainly we've seen in some countries that national libraries have an important role as a sort of central factor. We see academic libraries reaching out into communities, providing support to people around there. Clearly public libraries are front and center, though. They are the key actors here. There's interesting libraries supporting digital literacy in different ways. So this is from the more sort of simple technical things, how to turn the computer on, how to set up an email account, how to set up a LinkedIn profile, but also, as you can imagine, quite a lot of focus now on media literacy, information literacy, learning more advanced digital skills, more applied digital skills. All that's in there. All of this has been recognized by governments. And then, of course, different policy measures. So, I apologize, there's another typo in this one, but engagement in planning. So actually talking to libraries up front, using libraries' knowledge of stakeholders, of users' needs to design policy, supporting collaboration, again, not relying on libraries to do everything, but helping libraries to work with other providers, supporting the sector, providing the tools, equipment, and staff training, crucially, in order to help libraries go further. Then, this is the final report I'll talk about, although it goes over 2 slides because it's quite fresh. And I think as you said at the beginning, Sandra, there's some really interesting stuff in there. And it was a colleague who led in putting it together too. I'm extremely grateful, but I think it's a really useful piece of work. Firstly, it's a meta-analysis. It's a look across existing library public access public access impact assessment studies. And so it brings together data about, for example, who are the users of public access in libraries. In general, it tends to be groups who are more at risk of being marginalized. It tends to be people who have fewer other options outside, certainly people who are unemployed, who do have greater challenges, tend to do that. We know from broader statistics that in general, actually people who tend to be unemployed, people who tend to be in poor situations rely on libraries more. How has the use of public access in libraries changed? Again, it brings together data there. Crucially, there's finding that actually, as long as libraries are well maintained, as long as the technology is still there, that the devices are actually invested in, then actually public access stays relatively constant over time. So even as private access spreads, public access remains really important. Clearly, if there isn't investment in public access, then fewer people actually use it, but that's not going to be a surprise. There are the analyses of how do people use public access in libraries. There's a huge use of library access for education, but also for things like health. There's quite a lot of use of libraries to access information about how to find jobs, to fill in benefits forms, and so on. Again, that can all be demonstrated by the data. How does public access change library services? I think it has appeared, I don't know, what we do see is it seems that there is a stronger focus on skills. Interestingly, there's a focus on providing different types of skills, different types of activities that previously libraries may not have thought that they would do, but also, I guess, using some of the possibilities to assign resources to this. And then it also brings together the studies that we found that look at return on investment. So for every euro invested in public access in libraries, how many euros are you getting back? Clearly, return on investment studies are curious. There are different methodologies. A lot depends on the weighting that you give to things, but if we're talking advocacy, that can be a return on investment study can always be quite a powerful thing to use. And check there's another question. Excellent. I think Rosa makes a good point about the new and different skills and being ready to actually evolve what we're doing. So this is a really long slide. Hopefully actually a really important part of the guide and something that I hope could be helpful is we also run through the different ways in which we can evaluate impact. Now, I'm sure if any of you have done impact assessment training before, then you understand how this is done. Of course, you understand the value of it, but there's quite a lot in there. There's some really interesting sort of guides, pointers to tools, to methodologies that you can use. These methodologies are listed on the screen. It's counting the amount of physical access to computers, so how much usage, how many hours of usage, what tools there are. There are surveys, interviews, public access use and impacts, surveys of users. I think interestingly, actually, it covers the topic of how do you touch people and how do you get the views of people who aren't currently users, and you're going through the general population, because of course, if you talk to someone using a library computer and you ask them, what do you appreciate the library computer? Of course, they say yes. It's important to actually look more broadly. Also, some of the methodologies available for looking at the economic value of public access, but that's all in that sort of final report, which we only put out, I think we only put online earlier this week. So it's all very fresh. I think
just let me
please
make a note to reinforce the importance of this report to our colleagues. Este relatório de facto é muito importante. Damos aqui assim algumas estratégias para podermos pensar de facto como é que avaliamos o impacto dos serviços que disponibilizamos, e é uma forma de também podermos percepcionar os caminhos que estamos a fazer, de que forma é que os devemos reequacionar e também poder demonstrar para as nossas tutelas de que forma é que podemos recriar aqui os nossos serviços de maneira a que sejam úteis para os nossos utilizadores e para os não utilizadores também, como o Stefan falava ainda agora. Thank you, Stefan.
No, thank you. I think actually, again, there's been a really good point from Rosa in the Q&A that clearly these are studies looking at measuring what the impact is. Of course, I know you measure impact against the objectives you set yourself, and so any work around evaluation of impact should also be based on an assessment of what goals are worth pursuing. I know it's important. I know objectively because libraries are here to improve communities. I don't think people go into the library field because they want to do something positive, but also clearly in order to be funded, we need to make sure that we are answering the questions that politicians ask. The questions that politicians ask, the fundamental question that politicians ask is, how can I make people sufficiently happy to vote for me again? How can I demonstrate that I have taken decisions that make my society richer and happier and more prosperous, etc.? And so if this work, if you do evaluation based on a set of targets that you should have defined in relation to something that actually matters for communities. So participation, inclusion, economic empowerment, social cohesion, democratic participation. So I think that's something that it's you're absolutely right, it underpins all of this. So I was going to finish just with moving back a little bit on the advocacy side, but some points about the evolving role of libraries that I think are interesting here. The first, and I'm not sure what the answer is, but I think it's something that is an interesting advocacy argument to explore. And I used to work at the UK delegation, United Kingdom delegation to the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And the OECD loved to talk about countries moving up the value chain. And so how can you move from being an agricultural economy to a basic manufacturing economy, to an advanced manufacturing economy, to a services economy? How can you provide more valuable things and therefore sort of earn money on the international markets and not risk being undercut? And speaking in very, very broad terms, for example, I know that Portugal traditionally was an extremely strong textiles country, and that Portugal suffered a lot from movement of the textiles industry to Turkey and to other parts of the world. But also Portugal has a lot of extremely impressive businesses selling shoes, selling higher quality things, because there is this effort then to move up the value chain, to start thinking about, well, how can I do something but add more value to it so I can charge more, so I can get more out of it? And so this concept of moving up the value chain is something that I think it's interesting to think about in terms of libraries. That I know sometimes we get concerned that people don't use the reference desk anymore because they just go to Wikipedia. But we can also think about this in terms of, well, if we don't have to spend time asking people, if we don't have to spend time telling people the answers to simple questions, how does this free up our time to actually use our training better? How can we actually, rather than simply asking factual questions, use that understanding of information, use that understanding of our communities to do something really, really powerful, and actually draw on the time that connectivity may have given us, draw on the potential that connectivity offers us to really do something powerful. I don't know, it's an argument, I don't know, it's an interesting argument to make. I don't know, I'm still trying to work through it a little bit, but
it's important that the professionals have their own vision of the global stages of development, so they can inscribe the work they do at the libraries in that in that vision also. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's an obligation for all of us, especially us at IFLA, always to be thinking about what's the most impactful, what's the most useful way that I can spend my time in order to have the maximum positive impact. I think clearly something that we see a lot is this has shaken up the role of libraries in relation to content, and the fact that, especially as we move from books to ebooks and to subscriptions to databases and things like that, we no longer buy things, we contract for things. And that also sort of changes. Libraries are no longer buyers, they're expected to be experienced negotiators. And that sort of clearly creates responsibilities both for public libraries and for academic libraries. That's an interesting angle that we need to think about. One that obviously I do want to underline is that I think we should see ourselves as being valuable and important actors when it comes to discussions about the way that the internet works. Partly for our own account, because we rely on the internet to do our jobs. So many of the resources that we give access to are online. It's clearly an important part of the service we provide. But I think, and hopefully for the reasons that I've set out so far, libraries are that essential part. They are a pillar of the infrastructure for an inclusive internet. As said, we have the data. We do know that people who are in more marginalized, more difficult situations tend to rely on libraries more. We do know that libraries tend to provide additional services and support that help those who may otherwise lack the skills, that actually help people all become confident, competent users of the internet. And so it's a broader question. For example, I think that every year there's the big Lisbon Digital Summit. There's always a bigger conference every year, I think, in Lisbon about
Yes,
how the internet works. I don't know how
Web
many
Summit.
librarians attend. The Web Summit, that's it, I should know this. I don't know how many librarians attend. I'd love to think that we have lots of librarians going along, because in the end,
We have to ask the statistics of of the organization to know about that
yeah,
data. But it's interesting to know. Yes.
because in the end, firstly, we have libraries are the original internet. Libraries are the global network which enable people to access information through individual collections, but also through document sharing, through resource sharing. Libraries have values that matter about how you actually provide access in a way that respects rights, that follows codes of ethics. And of course, libraries are essential players in getting everyone online. So we do have really something to say. We should go into these conversations with confidence, with legitimacy, because we have these things. We're just we're getting towards the end, I promise, so that we may have time for a little bit of questions. So in terms of what IFLA is asking for, what we're pushing for globally, not just in Europe, but clearly one of the things is around continuing to push towards universal connectivity, including connecting all libraries. There's a lot of effort right now to connect all schools. We believe that libraries should be connected as well, both because they support education for school-age children, but also because they enable education throughout life. We think there are some interesting technologies. There are potentially interesting technologies to explore that allow this. When decisions are taken about how information and access to information is regulated, we need to make sure that the importance of access, the importance of professional judgment is in there, the importance in particular of empowering individuals rather than taking decisions for them is important as far as possible. Obviously, fake news is a big issue. Lots of people are regulating against misinformation. I think we always get worried when accessing to stop misinformation looks like it could become an excuse also to shut down other things, especially expression by minorities, people groups that may otherwise be at risk of persecution unfairly. And finally, as said, that libraries should be seen as a key part of any inclusive internet infrastructure. Where we're active, the Internet Governance Forum, which is the big multi-stakeholder UN process in order to talk about, to update, to talk about, to build networks, to build collaboration on how the internet should work. I think there's one in Portugal. These are often really good opportunities both to get up to speed on the issues, to try and shape what policymakers are thinking. But I think crucially, they're really good networking spaces because you get to meet people who often share the same goals as libraries. A lot of them are incredibly friendly towards libraries. They really see the value of what we do and would love to partner. There's the World Summit on the Information Society. I think I saw in the Facebook post that you've included the link to our latest submission there. Again, this looks at examples of how public access and highlights that role of public access the combination of connectivity and the sort of unique characteristics of libraries leading to change, leading to something positive. So we contribute to that. We'll be looking forwards to, there'll be a major new program amount of work on this leading up to 2025, because that will be the 20th anniversary. That's more of an intergovernmental process, but in the end, governments take most of the decisions here. Sandra, I see you've unmuted. Okay. Another key area at the moment is the Portuguese Secretary General of the United Nations has clearly taken a very significant interest in the way that the internet works, and he's taken a number of initiatives in this direction. An important one, so ahead of what's been called the Summit of the Future. It's a very big name. It's going to be a very big event in 2024 now. It's been pushed back. One of the key pillars of the work he's looking at there is another look at how the internet is working. So how do we deal with the problems? Because there are problems, and the way that the economics of the internet work, the power of certain platforms, the risks of loss of privacy, but also the more positive side. How do we get everyone online? How do we get over the fact that still we have barely half of the world's population connected? There's quite a lot of work around this. There's discussion. We have submitted. You can look to submit. They pushed the deadline back until March of next year. It's a really good opportunity.
That event you are talking about, it's a UN event?
It's a UN event. So if you just put Global Digital Compact into a search engine, this will come out. And this is something that Guterres has been very strong on and that he's really pushing for. So
if is going to be a part of this event also?
So we'll try and get into the event. We have a number of routes for trying to do it. There's an angle around integrity. That there's a few possibilities for getting in there. We'll certainly be contributing in the run up to it, and we'll be looking to get involved because there are threads around education, around integrity, around digital, which are all very relevant. These are all areas where libraries really do have something to say.
Yes.
We get involved at WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, in order to make the case for copyright laws that actually allow libraries to carry out their missions in a digital age. We work with UNESCO. They're doing some really interesting work around how do you measure internet universality. These really need to be updated to reflect the importance of public access. And of course, in so many other ways, we have to touch on digital issues in order to talk about what we care about in terms of access to information. So with that, that's quite a lot, and I realize I've spoken for a lot longer than I thought I was going to speak. I hope that's not been too long.
We can continue to listen to these topics. They are so important. We have to realize, in fact, I think it starts for us to realize the importance of our job, so we can realize that it's very important what information, what the professionals are doing every day to get these conditions of access to information for all the communities, and then we can look to our projects and evaluate them, try to adjust to the community needs, and try always to do something better. I'm going to see if the participants have any questions. We have some on our boxes. If you can see, Stefan, please.
Yes, so I think there's
Rosa.
Rosa's been very active, so thank you, Rosa.
Yes,
I think
she believes in libraries, as we all do.
But and I think I was going to say one of the really interesting things. I don't know how much this happens in Portugal, but I think there's a lot of really interesting potential for libraries to work with other organizations involved in digital education and digital health and so on. So for example, in the last couple of days, I was talking with a colleague from Australia. And Australia's got a really great library association. I'm always extremely envious of what they do. But for example, one project that they had was the government had set up a program of digital health records. And the idea was to make it easier for individuals to access their own digital health records. crucially to take decisions about how much of this information could be shared with other doctors, with researchers or whatever. And so the government set this thing up, but they didn't know how to engage the public. And so what they did is, I'm not sure exactly how it was triggered, but the libraries were able to sort of stand up and heard about this discussion and approached the government and said, well, we have this network of a few thousand institutions across the country with people whose role is to talk about information and what are the issues associated with information and how do you get hold of these things. And they managed to actually secure a reasonably impressive budget from the government in order to train librarians, to train users about how to take decisions, about how to use these health records. And I don't know, that's such a fantastic example. It's libraries combining with others,
Yes,
to deliver on a policy objective that's not seen as a core library policy. But why not? It's an information objective.
it's the wide range of literacy that we can devolve to people, so they can make the right access and the right choices in their lives.
And I know, I'm just thinking I'm going to pronounce things horribly badly. I know that, for example, the library in Seychelles, Seychelles, that's it, I was trying to pronounce it correctly. I know that they've done some excellent work, for example, around civic engagement and democratic engagement. I think to a large extent using materials that are available from online, so this would not be possible without internet connectivity. But the result being that actually you have
Yes.
a measurable increase in democratic engagement. So I think some of the times I think some of the time it's the case that we are already doing these things, and we measure our success in terms of numbers of sessions or people through the door. But we can probably be a little bit more imaginative in asking questions about, and what did, I don't know, do you feel more confident about this? Do you feel readier to get involved in a local election? I don't know. So sometimes I don't know, we're doing a lot of this stuff and we almost just need to ask the right questions of our users in order to show this.
Yes, in Portugal, there are many examples of libraries. Mostly all try to think as a possibility of doing that, giving that opportunity to the public. Sometimes we don't evaluate. That's the key factor. I think it's the answer to stop, look at what we are doing, see if it's enough, if people want more or in some way differently, who's in the library and who is not, the people who isn't yet the library, how can we bring them to our services and how can we get outside also with our services and try to do a better job. So and evaluation is the key factor. I think it starts over.
Exactly. So you start by defining your goals. So make sure you do it as a proper process. But we can't underestimate the value of that. I think that's, I don't know, coming back to the point about how do we advocate for sufficient support for public access. I don't know, clearly the gold standard is properly evaluated evidence from within the country. Obviously, the sorts of examples shared in the impact report that we've talked about so far, that's useful because you can give an idea of what a comparable program in another country has done. And of course, by carrying out in impact assessment and printing and publishing what you've done, then actually you support the rest of the library world, because then that evidence base just grows that little bit stronger. Clearly, when working with governments, you're working with human beings. Human beings like stories about people with faces and names, so don't underestimate the power of anecdotes, because people are much more likely to remember a child with a photo with a happy-looking child than they are a statistic. That's powerful. Also, the reports that we've done about how libraries are incorporated into broadband policies and digital skills strategies elsewhere. That's also important because politicians often don't want to be the first to do something. They want to show that someone else has done it first. And so that can also help there.
Besides the quantitative data, statistics, and that approach, the human factor you are talking about right now, the story of my life as a user of a library. We sometimes have stories of people that go to the library since they were a child and now they are adults, and in what aspects did the library bring them the ability and the competences that they have reached now, past 20 years of using the library? Sometimes that stories also help to bring the human factor to the politics also, besides the other data, the numbers and what do you think?
Yeah, oh no, absolutely. It's I don't know. I think Daniel Kahneman got a Nobel Prize for pointing out that often actually humans are. This sounds bad. Humans are irrational, but humans like something that is they can remember easily. And I said, people remember these stories easily. I think the interesting thing there, that the thing that we need to do, and again, it's a case of, it's a bit like with evaluation. It's very easy to think, I don't have time for this now. But actually, if we just spend 1-2% of our time, or even sort of, if we just spend an hour a week of our working lives writing down, I don't know, things that are useful for the future. Is it, I don't know, a story that we've heard, and an instance, an example of the impact that we've heard, a reflection on what we've learned, a reflection on something we want to do in the future? That's a really good investment, because actually then over time you build up your bank of examples for advocacy. So the next time you go and see the mayor, you can say, well, there was this person, this person, this person. Then that always helps. Clearly, investing time in evaluation is, I don't know, if it's done properly, and if you think hard about what you're evaluating and why, and what's it going to be useful for, again, that can be really indispensable.
Yes, in fact. So let's see if we have any questions for Stephen. Rosa is still doing her comments. Use us. We are here for you. She's talking about libraries. In fact, it's that phrase that we have to keep for ourselves, because libraries are there for people, are there for communities.
Wow, and exactly, it's not like we're asking for more money. We're already doing this. I think politicians so much of the time are faced with people who turn up and say, give us money to do this. And libraries can genuinely go and say, we are already doing this. How can we work together?
Yes.
I think that was, for example, the Australian health case, which I find fantastic also, because in the end, health budgets are far bigger than library budgets. And so it's an interesting place to look if we want to diversify our funding. But it was a case of, no, it's an activity that libraries are already carrying out, and it was so little additional investment needed compared to the budget for electronic health records in general, in order to carry out something actually with a potentially transformative impact. So I think, libraries are low-hanging fruit, and I think it's just sometimes it's a lack of imagination, on the lack of awareness on the part of policymakers, especially outside of our traditional domains, outside the traditional areas of culture and education. It's getting employment agencies and health and democratic participation actors
yes,
involved.
I think it's important to say we have to get outside the routine. The routine of the same projects that we are doing the same time, all the same way, and try to listen to people and observe which people are not at the library but need us. In each way, in what ways they in fact need library services, and sometimes stop what we are doing and do something else.
And it can be painful, because obviously we don't have
Yes,
an
it can be
infinite time.
painful.
We have to stop doing things that we like. But again, it's a phrase I quite like. I know we can have a tendency to say that, well, the answer is libraries, so it really doesn't matter what the question is. And we need to move to a situation of saying, well, I don't know, what are the questions that the people who matter, so the decision makers, the users, what are the questions that they are asking? And can we make sure that libraries are the answer? And that implies that there will be situations where we aren't necessarily the answer, and that's not a bad thing, because we only have so many resources. But we just need to be making sure, as you say, that we are providing an answer to the questions that people are actually asking, not the questions that we think they should be asking.
Right on. Yes. That's the key question. Let me see if we have any questions here.
I think even Rosa's exhausted now.
Rosa will continue.
Never exhausted.
Yes, bring the politicians to the library, not the children, and don't have any budget. Okay.
But even politicians are children once.
I think it's bring everyone to the library and bring the library to everyone also. It's a mix. Agora aqui pouco, a little bit in Portuguese. Todas estas questões, e nós ainda temos 25 participantes connosco neste momento, portanto dizer-vos que ainda bem que estão a ouvir-nos. De facto temos muito que pensar das nossas escolhas, da forma como fazemos o nosso trabalho e como é que o continuamos a fazer, para quem é que o estamos a fazer e a forma como o fazemos, se de facto estamos a ser abrangentes na nossa atuação, e de que forma é que devemos ir ao alcance de todos aqueles que não estão na biblioteca, mas que também precisam e que precisam muito dela, e portanto às vezes precisamos de parar um bocadinho nas nossas rotinas, e pararmos e observarmos e ouvirmos e escutarmos e darmos atenção e ter de facto a coragem de arriscar, fazer coisas diferentes e que possam ir ao encontro das necessidades das populações que servimos. Portanto, foi muito importante este testemunho também do Stefan. It was very important to have you here. I don't think it's any question now, so we may...
I was going to say, if you want to have a challenge, I'm sort of having a quick look through this, but I don't know, the point about bringing politicians into the library is such an important one. Obviously, for example, there are Portuguese MEPs who have an important role in Brussels and who will have constituency offices back in Portugal and who you can invite into libraries. I think there should be a massive prize for the first library in Portugal to get Antonio Guterres to come and visit, to get Guterres from the UN Secretary General.
Guterres, yes.
Because I don't know, there are libraries in Portugal working on the SDGs. He will come back from time to time. He's obviously he's from Lisbon originally.
It may be a strategy when he comes to Portugal to invite him to a trip for some
an event about libraries. I know, a local
libraries, in fact, yes.
He will come home sometime. So I don't know, it's and a lot of politicians like to be photographed in libraries. They look intelligent that way. So
she's
intelligent.
We would certainly hope that the more politicians would like to be photographed. Yes, in fact, it would show that they consider libraries as a space of knowledge and a space of opportunity. Not always that happens, but we are going to continue to do our job, because libraries are not for politicians, are for all the communities. So with open doors to the information, into better lives, to happiness, and for better societies. Vamos despedir-nos do Stefan. We are going to say goodbye. Thank you so much. Maybe sometime we'll challenge you to another topic. Is that okay?
Yes.
Então vamos despedir-nos do Stefan, agradecer também a vossa participação, dizer-vos que temos ainda este ano um novo webinar no início de dezembro, com a Biblioteca Humana com as bibliotecas de Lisboa, bibliotecas de Marvila. So Stefan, thank you so much. I hope get in touch next time for another subject. Thank you so much. We'll stay with these thoughts so we can evaluate, and we are going most certainly to explore this report in the way it should be explored.
And use them. There
Yes.
be references.
Yes. Thank you so much, Stefan.
Thank you.
See
Have
you.
a good day. Have a good
Thank you.
afternoon.
Yes.
Bye.
Obrigada a todos, uma boa tarde e até dezembro. Muito obrigada. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you.
Bye.